The first mistake was assuming they didn't belong there. Two boys, black, maybe 10 and 7, walking into a luxury supercar showroom in Beverly Hills. One held the other's hand, gentle but confident. No wild movements, no loud voices, just wide eyes and quiet awe. They weren't touching anything. They didn't need to. Just being near a Bugatti Chiron and a Ferrari SF90 felt like magic. But to the man behind the counter, Colin Reeves, the showroom floor manager, they weren't magic. They were a problem. He didn't ask if they were lost. He didn't ask if someone was with them. He just walked up, chest puffed, sunglasses still on inside. "Hey, this isn't a playground," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "You can gawk from the sidewalk." The older boy straightened his back, didn't say a word. The little one looked up, confused, more hurt than scared. Colin motioned toward the door. "Out, now, before I call security." And so they left, quietly, without protest. But Colin didn't see what the older boy did as they stepped outside. He pulled out his phone, typed a single text. An hour later, the door opened again. Same boys, this time with their father. No one said a word yet, but Colin's smirk was already returning. He didn't know that the man standing in front of him didn't come to argue. He came to buy, and to end Colin's career before the espresso machine finished its next cycle. Speech balloon, maybe you've met someone like him. Thought balloon, or maybe you've been that kid. Fire, drop a comment if this felt familiar. Red heart, like if you've ever been underestimated. Repeat button, share this, because this time, the story doesn't end the way it used to. Every Saturday morning, Micah made the same routine. White sneakers, pressed khaki shorts, a navy blue hoodie one size too big that used to belong to his dad. He always held Isaiah's hand, not out of fear, but because that's what big brothers do. Isaiah was 7. Micah had just turned 11, but he walked like someone who knew how the world looked at them. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Encino. Their home wasn't flashy, but if you looked closer, the details spoke volumes. Real hardwood floors, a stacked bookshelf in the entryway, art on the walls that didn't try to match the furniture. Their father, Julian King, never flaunted his money. Not in the cars he drove, not in the clothes he wore. But he was, without a doubt, wealthier than most of the people who ever stood in the same room with him. He made his first million by 24, his first 100 million by 31. Now, at 42, he spent more time as a mentor than a CEO. He built and sold companies in logistics, AI, and financial platforms. What he kept was control. What he gave was freedom. Micah didn't know all the details, just that people listened when his dad spoke. And more importantly, his dad listened when he spoke. Which was why, when Micah asked if he could take Isaiah to the supercar showroom for fun, Julian didn't hesitate. "Stay close. Keep your hands in your pockets. And take it in," he told him. "One day, you'll walk in there and say, 'That one's mine.'" Micah smiled. He didn't know that today, that simple walk would change everything. The showroom sat like a modern cathedral, glass, steel, silence. Every curve of every car was lit like it was sacred. Micah and Isaiah stepped inside like explorers. They didn't run. They didn't touch. They just looked. A deep red Ferrari, a satin black Lamborghini, and in the center, a Bugatti, white with black rims. It didn't just look fast. It looked like it had never waited for anyone. Isaiah whispered, "Is that the one from the movie?" Micah nodded. "Yeah, that's the one." They leaned closer, not touching, just marveling. And that's when the manager saw them. Colin Reeves was the kind of man who believed money had a face, and that face didn't look like theirs. He saw 2 black boys. No adults. No designer labels. No security detail. To him, that meant only one thing: risk. He approached with a walk that said, "I don't get paid enough to deal with this." His sunglasses stayed on. "Hey, this isn't a playground," he said, flat, bored, and loud enough for everyone to hear. Micah turned, didn't respond. "You can look through the glass from outside. This isn't for—" He trailed off, but the rest of the room heard the sentence he didn't finish. Isaiah's grip on Micah's hand tightened. Colin waved a hand toward the door. "Out, now, before I call security." Micah didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He just looked up at the man calm, held Isaiah's hand tighter, and turned to walk out. But just before the door closed behind them, Micah did one thing. He pulled out his phone. They sat on the bench outside. Isaiah looked down. Micah looked forward. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. "You want to go home?" Micah asked softly. Isaiah shook his head. Micah nodded, then typed one message. Not long. Not dramatic. Just, "Isaiah got kicked out. Store guy said we didn't belong." Inside their home, Julian was on a video call when his phone buzzed. He saw the message. Read it once. Didn't respond. He just ended the call mid-sentence, stood up, and changed his shirt. When Julian King walked through the showroom doors, he didn't walk like someone coming to cause a scene. He walked like someone who'd built scenes like this from scratch. He wore a plain gray crew neck, black pants, and an old pair of Chelsea boots. Nothing designer. But the weight of his silence made the receptionist stand up. Micah and Isaiah followed behind him, still quiet, still composed, and when Colin turned and saw them again, his face twisted. "Okay, this is harassment. I'm calling the—" He didn't finish, because behind him a voice rang out. "Julian." Everyone turned. From the back hallway, a man emerged, early 50s, white hair, Italian loafers, sharp suit. It was Angelo Carvani, owner of the showroom, owner of the building, friend and former college roommate of Julian King. He walked past Colin like he didn't exist, wrapped Julian in a hug, then dropped to one knee and smiled at the boys. "Micah, Isaiah, you've grown. You picked a favorite yet?" Isaiah pointed at the Bugatti. Angelo grinned. "Excellent taste." Then he stood and looked directly at Colin. "Did you speak to them earlier?" Colin stammered. I thought they were." "You thought wrong," Angelo said flat. Then he turned to Julian. "Do you want to handle this, or should I?" Julian didn't speak. He just looked at Colin, and then, finally said, "Pack your things." Colin froze. Angelo didn't blink. The room didn't clap. No one spoke, because when real power walks in, it doesn't need volume. It just ends the conversation. The showroom was just the beginning. What Colin didn't know, what most people never knew, was that wealth like Julian's didn't just sit in bank accounts or hover behind gated communities. It lived inside systems, inside companies, trusts, advisory boards, and silent partnerships. Julian King didn't just own things. He had influence in the places where decisions got made. The showroom was one of many ventures under the Carvani Group, an elite European-based luxury auto conglomerate with branches in 5 countries and clients in over 30. And Julian? He'd been one of the earliest private investors when the brand expanded into the U.S. He wasn't just a friend of Angelo. He sat on the global advisory board. His name, silent to the public, was printed on internal memos next to phrases like equity restructure and brand growth strategy. So when Julian told Colin to pack your things, it wasn't a moment of anger. It was a procedural decision, and the system behind the showroom would follow. The next morning, Colin's access badge didn't work. He stood outside the glass doors, tapping, calling. Inside, the new assistant manager watched him, then looked away. No one came to the door. By noon, Colin received an email from HR. "As part of our brand's recommitment to ethical service standards, we've decided to end your employment with immediate effect. Please refer to the attached severance documents." He opened the PDF. Tried to call Angelo. No answer. He drove to his sister's house that night, angry, ranting. "All I did was protect the space. They didn't belong there." But even she didn't back him up. She worked in tech. She'd seen the articles. She knew who Julian King was. "You didn't protect anything," she said. "You proved why the space needs protecting from people like you." Meanwhile, Julian wasn't thinking about Colin anymore. He was thinking about the system Colin worked in. The client-first culture that somehow always made certain clients feel second. He opened a file on his laptop. Brand Portfolio DI Compliance. He'd requested that document 2 weeks ago. At the time, it was curiosity. Now it was clarity. Inside the file were 33 reports, compiled by showroom branches around the country. What they showed was subtle, but undeniable. In LA, 67% of flag customers were non-white, though they made up less than 40% of traffic. In Miami, 3 black clients were asked to provide 2 forms of ID for test drives, even though the policy only required 1. In Chicago, a staff member had written, looked out of place, kept asking high-end questions next to a black client's profile. Julian scrolled, read, saved screenshots, made notes. This wasn't about Colin. Colin was a symptom. This was about the structure that gave Colin permission to decide who did and didn't belong without ever saying it out loud. The next call he made wasn't to Angelo. It was to Nadira. Nadira Bell, executive counsel to the advisory board, corporate law genius, known for her memory, her logic, and her refusal to sugarcoat anything. Send me the bylaws, Julian said. Which ones? All of them. She didn't ask questions. She just said, by end of day. That night, Julian printed the documents, highlighted clauses, wrote notes in margins, found the paragraph that mattered most. Advisory board members reserve the right to call for formal review of regional operations in the event of ethical failure, policy breach, or reputational risk. He underlined the last part. Reputational risk. 2 days later, a formal request for internal audit and compliance review was submitted to the Carvani Group Board, signed by Julian, seconded by 2 other advisors, both investors of color. Within hours, the New York and Miami branches received audit notices. Beverly Hills was next. Employees were told it was just a process. But the staff knew. They whispered about what happened with the boys and the guy who got fired. They noticed the new policy documents being handed out. They saw the new posters about inclusive luxury. They saw the corporate liaisons, sharp suits, calm faces, asking to review CCTV. No one said Colin's name. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Something shifted, and this time it wasn't going back. Julian stayed out of the showroom. He wasn't there to be seen. He was working behind the scenes. He hosted 2 calls with board members about restructuring client intake protocols. He funded a scholarship for young black designers interested in auto engineering. He started conversations with other investors about creating an ownership pathway for showroom managers from underserved communities. But he never posted about it, never tweeted, never released a statement. Because this wasn't about attention. It was about alignment. Micah didn't know all of this, but he felt it. The next time he walked past the showroom, a new manager waved at him through the window. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, just recognition. Micah nodded and kept walking. That evening, he asked his dad, "Why didn't you say anything in the store?" That day, Julian looked at him, smiled gently. "Because I wasn't there to fight him, son. I was there to replace him." The audit wasn't public, but it didn't need to be. People felt it. In how their emails were suddenly being reviewed, how client logs were now time-stamped twice, how every face-to-face interaction started to feel like it might be watched. Still, most employees thought it would blow over. A few compliance forms, some retraining, a cultural sensitivity webinar, then business as usual, until someone crossed the line and gave the audit a face. It happened quietly, almost like déjà vu. At the Miami branch of Carvani Lux, on a warm Thursday afternoon, a family walked in. Black, mid-30s, a man, a woman, and their daughter, no older than 8. They wore their Sunday best. The girl wore a yellow bow in her hair, matching the Ferrari in the center of the showroom. She walked with quiet wonder, holding her mother's hand. "Daddy," she whispered, "that one looks like a superhero car." He smiled. "That's the Ferrari SF90. The mother nodded. "You've got taste." The girl laughed. The 3 walked in slowly, respectfully. They didn't reach for anything. They didn't step too close. But the showroom manager, a man named Glenn, saw something else entirely. He saw threat. Not loud, not violent, just black. He approached them like someone inspecting a crack in his window. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes," the father said kindly. "We're looking around. Just curious." Glenn looked them up and down. He didn't see a watch he recognized. He didn't see a card already in hand. He didn't see whiteness. So he leaned in and said with a smirk, "This is a sales floor, not a field trip." The mother stiffened. The daughter looked down. Glenn didn't stop. "If you're not here for serious business, I'll ask you to step outside. We've had issues with browsers wasting time." Other clients were watching. One man raised his phone. The woman pulled out hers, not to record but to protect. The guard walked toward them, slowly. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. "No problem," Glenn replied. "Just redirecting some foot traffic." And that's when the father finally spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He just said, "You're going to want to reroute that sentence." Glenn blinked. "Excuse me?" The father turned to the guard. "Get your manager. Not the floor one. The regional one." Now the room was silent. The regional manager arrived within 15 minutes. By then, the family had already stepped outside, by choice. Glenn stood, smug. He expected backup. He didn't get it. The regional manager didn't even ask for context. He walked past Glenn, straight to the family, and he apologized on record, in front of staff, in front of cameras, in front of clients. That same evening, an image appeared online. The father standing with his daughter, hand on her shoulder outside the showroom. The Ferrari in the background. Captioned, "Told we didn't belong. Turns out we own the moment." The post went viral in hours. And for the first time, the Carvani Group's audit had a public face. Not Julian. Not Micah. Someone else, a father. Quiet, dignified, angry without noise. The image reached Julian that same night. He didn't react. He just forwarded it to Nadira with 3 words. "It's time. Initiate." The next morning, Nadira sent a memo to the advisory board. Subject, formal compliance, escalation, pattern of behavior confirmed. Attached, 47 incidents, 11 ignored complaints, 22 flagged reviews from clients of color, 14 internal reports, never actioned. Timeline, for years. Branches involved, 6. Julian didn't speak publicly. He didn't need to. The documentation was louder than outrage, and it hit harder. That same week, the Carvani board announced a sweeping internal restructuring. The regional manager of Miami was reassigned. Glenn was suspended pending investigation. A third-party task force was commissioned. But behind closed doors, Julian was already working on something deeper. He didn't just want policies changed. He wanted them codified. He wanted contracts rewritten, clauses added for racial equity enforcement. He wanted bonuses tied to inclusion scores. And most of all, he wanted accountability with teeth. Meanwhile, Glenn tried to push back. He wrote emails, demanded his job, claimed misunderstanding. He even tried to say the family provoked him. But the cameras didn't lie, and neither did the culture he'd helped enforce. By week's end, his resignation was accepted without severance, and his access terminated. Micah didn't know the details, but he saw his dad working longer hours. He saw the new documents on the table. He saw something else, too, a letter from the girl's father, handwritten. "I never knew I'd be part of something bigger, but I saw what you did, and because of you, my daughter knows that her skin isn't a reason to be removed. It's a reason to be remembered." Julian folded the letter, tucked it in his notebook, then went back to work. Because this wasn't over. The line had been crossed, and now there was no turning back. They thought they'd contained it. A few suspensions, a policy rewrite, an apology tour. The company even filmed a glossy, "We Hear You" video, smooth jazz, mixed-race staff nodding, a CEO looking solemn behind a glass desk. But it wasn't over, because the real audit hadn't even started yet. On a Wednesday morning, the Carvani Group executive leadership arrived at their New York headquarters for what they thought was a quarterly meeting. Instead, they were met by a federal mediator, 2 civil rights attorneys, and Julian King. Not on Zoom, not through email, in person, standing, with a binder, and an agenda. No smiles, no greetings, just Julian sliding a chair back and sitting down at the head of the table, the chair usually reserved for Angelo Carvani himself. Angelo didn't object. He just folded his hands and said, "Let's begin." Julian opened the binder. Inside, 78 pages of internal findings. Every branch, every region, emails, time-stamped interactions, rejected complaints, ignored red flags, audio transcripts. "I'm not here to debate values," Julian began. "I'm here to address systems." He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up. Slide 1, a map. Every Carvani showroom, color-coded by incident severity. Slide 2, staff demographic breakdown compared to the income bracket of the regions they served. Slide 3, retention rates of Black and Latino employees. The sharpest drop-off was post-hiring within 90 days. No one interrupted. No one could. Julian didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. But everything in the room shifted when he spoke. Because they finally realized this wasn't a speech. It was a motion. A formal, legally documented plan for internal transformation, backed by investor power, legal precedent, and the weight of the national spotlight. He ended the presentation with one sentence. "We're not here to repair your image. We're here to rewire your institution." Then he set down a folder marked, "Mandatory, Leadership Ethics Requalification." Angelo took it first. Inside, guidelines, new benchmarks, non-negotiables. Any executive who refused to comply, immediate termination. Any region who failed their third-party compliance audit, suspended funding. And there, signed on the final page, was a note from 3 of the largest shareholders backing Julian's full plan. One sentence had been underlined. "The cost of complicity is now quantifiable." A silence followed. Then a voice from the end of the table, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Julian," he started, "this is comprehensive, but it's disruptive." Julian didn't blink. "It's supposed to be." Another executive leaned forward. "And if we push back?" Julian turned a page in the binder, displayed a list of alternative buyers, names of competitors already interested in purchasing showroom licenses if a compliance breach affected brand value. "You'll be replaced, but the work won't." From that point on, no one protested, because they knew it was already done. Julian wasn't asking. He was confirming. He stood up to leave, then paused. "This didn't start with one man being disrespectful to my children," he said. "It started long before that. But that moment, that silence in a room when no one spoke for them, told me everything I needed to know." He turned to Angelo. "I stayed silent for too long. I won't be part of that silence anymore." Then he left. No dramatic exit. No cameras. Just the sound of leather shoes walking out of a room that had never had to listen before. Back in Beverly Hills, the showroom felt different. Micah noticed it first. The front desk no longer looked like it was guarding the entrance to a vault. The staff, diverse now, greeted him by name. Not because they were trained to, but because they'd remembered. Because now, they knew who walked in the door. And who might be watching. A new regional director took over. Her first move? She installed a plaque on the wall near the Bugatti. "Luxury without dignity is just a price tag." Micah asked his dad if he had written it. Julian smiled. "Nope." Someone inside finally understood the assignment. He thought it would go quietly. Glenn, the manager for Miami, had been keeping his head down since his resignation. He posted a carefully worded message on LinkedIn. Claimed he was transitioning into new opportunities and grateful for the journey. He even reached out to a friend who worked at another dealership chain, tried to set up a new position behind closed doors. What Glenn didn't know was that his name wasn't just part of a resignation file. It was part of a report with footnotes. One of those footnotes contained a direct quote, "This is a sales floor, not a field trip." It had been verified by 3 different people. And the man he had insulted that day, the one who didn't raise his voice, he had submitted a formal statement, not to the company, to federal investigators. It wasn't just a bad PR moment anymore. It was a legal issue, part of an ongoing investigation into systemic discrimination in retail luxury environments, one that Julian had quietly helped initiate with 2 civil rights groups and a legal research coalition. Glenn had crossed the line, and now he was going to have to sit across from it. They scheduled the mediation in a glass office suite in downtown Miami. Glenn showed up in a tailored blue blazer and loafers with no socks. He smiled politely, held a coffee he didn't drink, tried to look like someone in control. Julian didn't smile, didn't dress to impress. He arrived in a dark gray shirt, plain slacks, and a binder under his arm. They didn't shake hands. The moderator opened with a line Glenn had hoped to avoid. "Before we begin, Mr. King has brought documentation." Julian didn't nod. He simply opened the binder and started reading, not with flair, not with venom. Just like someone checking off items from a list. March 8th, client log shows you marked a walk-in family as likely low potential. No documentation. April 4th, flagged security for overstayed presence for a black couple reviewing brochures. May 14th, denied test drive to a Latino man with verified credit. Noted as uncertain match for the brand. Glenn shifted in his seat. "I acted on instinct," he said. Julian flipped a page. "Your instinct is documented over 43 entries, and 93% of those were directed at non-white customers." The mediator didn't speak. Neither did Glenn. Julian continued. "We found internal messages. Some deleted. Some recovered. One, not another looker. These people don't buy. They post selfies. Another, let's keep the space clear of randoms. Especially the loud ones." "I never meant." Julian cut him off. "Not with volume. With precision. Intent doesn't erase pattern." Glenn tried to pivot. "I've changed," he said. "I've done the trainings. I've volunteered." Julian leaned forward. Not threatening. Just present. "You didn't lose your job because you made a mistake. You lost it because you upheld a system that punished presence." He let the words hang. Then opened the final page. "You want to work again. I get that. But understand this. Every time your name is brought up in a hiring background, this file will be requested. Not because I'm vengeful. Because I'm responsible." Glenn sat frozen. The smile was gone. So was the pretense. Outside the room, no one clapped. No one took pictures. But the mediator turned to Glenn and said, quietly, "You may want to take some time before pursuing another leadership role." Glenn didn't reply. He just stared at the table. Julian stood, closed the binder, and walked out. He didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was finished. Back in L.A., Micah sat at the kitchen table doing math homework. He looked up at his dad walking in. "Did you win?" he asked. Julian shrugged. "No winners. Just records." Micah smiled. That was enough. The next day, a message circulated through Carvani's internal legal team. When the system fails to act, someone must become the system. It was unsigned, but everyone knew where it came from. It started with one email. Just a short note from a former intern who had worked under Glenn in Miami. Subject line, "For what it's worth." Inside, she wrote about the list. A quiet list, never official, passed around by managers at 3 Carvani branches. It labeled customers with coded colors. Red meant high value. Yellow meant maybe if they looked the part. Blue meant low priority. But then there was the color she couldn't forget. Gray. Gray was for people who don't belong here but haven't left yet. She'd asked what that meant. Glenn told her with a laugh. Gray means what you think it means. She didn't report it then. She needed the internship. She needed the reference. But now she sent it to the compliance inbox anonymously. That email opened a door people had been staring at for years, but never dared to touch. Within hours, others followed. An assistant manager in Houston sent a folder of internal messages. A former marketing intern submitted a design proposal that had been scrapped because it focused too heavily on non-white clients. A senior sales associate from Chicago sent in her resignation, along with 21 client screenshots. One message read, "He's got the money, but he's not our type of rich." HR couldn't contain it. They tried, but screenshots don't vanish. They circulate. And the quiet voices? They got louder. Then someone leaked a training manual. Unofficial, but real. A section labeled client filtering. Another labeled pre-qualifying the walk-in. One line read, "If the vibe doesn't match the vehicle, trust your instinct." The phrase hit social media like a spark on gasoline. Hashtag vibe doesn't match trended for 2 days straight. Julian didn't post. He didn't comment. He didn't need to, because the silence was over. Nadira fielded 5 press requests. She declined all of them with the same line. Our job is not to speak to headlines. Our job is to correct history, and this is just the start. Inside Carvani headquarters, fear replaced denial. Leaders who once smirked now watched every word. Departments were asked to submit culture reflections. But employees didn't write corporate fluff. They wrote truth. I stayed quiet because I needed the check. But now I realize silence pays less than integrity. I used to laugh at the jokes, not because they were funny, because I didn't want to be the next Gray. An internal Slack message surfaced from a white employee who had worked under Glenn. It read, I watched him humiliate that family. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place, but it was always my place. The message went viral inside the company. Someone printed it out, taped it next to every espresso machine. Even Angelo, founder CEO, stepped back from the day-to-day. He issued a letter handwritten. No PR firm, just ink. If this brand stands for elegance, then silence cannot be elegant, not when it allows exclusion to wear a suit. Branches began holding clear the floor hours, not for customers, for conversation. Formerly silenced employees led the sessions, not managers. Julian didn't attend any of them. He didn't need to. The shift had begun, not from him, from within. One afternoon, a receptionist who'd once looked through mica walked up and said, I remember that day. I remember looking down. I'm sorry I made that seem normal. Micah didn't answer. He didn't have to. She wasn't asking for a reply. She was owning a mirror. More letters arrived at Julian's office. One from a black employee in Denver. They told me to speak more brand. I didn't know they meant speak less of myself. Thank you for breaking the silence. One from a Latino client in San Jose. They said the paperwork was missing. But what was really missing was respect. You gave that back to us. Julian archived them all. Not to store them, to study them. Because he knew systems don't fall when they're exposed. They fall when the people inside stop propping them up. And now, no one wanted to be the next Glenn. Not because they feared shame, but because they finally understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of silence. The press wanted a statement. Julian declined every request, not because he was hiding, but because he wasn't interested in sound bites. Justice, to him, didn't come with applause. It came with action. So, on a quiet Tuesday morning, he walked into the Carvani West regional office in Los Angeles with one envelope. No entourage, no cameras. Inside the envelope, a finalized document authorizing the restructuring of executive compensation, now tied directly to anti-bias benchmarks, client satisfaction metrics, and internal culture audits. The board had already signed. His was the final signature. He read it once, then signed it. No speech. No announcement, just the weight of ink turning into consequence. The HR director came into the room moments later, holding another document, a reinstatement order. Not for Glenn, not for anyone from the past. This one was different. It reinstated an old program that had been quietly shelved years ago, a pipeline initiative to promote showroom staff of color into leadership roles. The program had been paused during a restructuring. Now it was back with a budget 5 times larger and a permanent seat on the strategic board. Julian initialed the bottom corner, then stood up and left the office. It took less than 15 minutes, but systems turn quietly when you know where the levers are. That afternoon, a new code of ethics memo was sent to every regional manager. It began with a quote, "Silence was never neutral. It was protection. And that protection is now revoked." No one signed it, but everyone knew where it came from. Julian didn't call a press conference. He didn't stand behind a podium. But the showroom staff noticed something had shifted. The tempo of the floor was different. Less stiff, less guarded. Customers who looked like Micah and Isaiah started getting eye contact. Real attention. Respect, not performative. Present. Angelo called Julian that night. Said he'd never seen change move that fast. Julian replied, "It wasn't fast. It just finally stopped being delayed." Weeks passed. Then, one morning, an internal Carvani-wide alert went out. New standards live. Review mandatory. Attached, a 94-page document outlining new practices. Client handling protocols with anonymous ratings. A zero-tolerance policy for profiling enforced with secret shopper audits. A new cross-region accountability task force. Monthly culture review, led by staff, not executives. There were no launch videos, no slogans, just policy, and paper that now had power behind it. Micah noticed it, too. He went to the Beverly Hills showroom again with his dad. Same Bugatti, same Ferrari, same layout. But the person who greeted them didn't look past them. She knelt down, shook Isaiah's hand, and asked, "Want to sit in one?" Isaiah's jaw dropped. Micah blinked. Julian didn't say anything. He just watched. Inside, Isaiah sat in the car, hands off the wheel, grinning. "Can we really afford this?" he whispered. Julian leaned down. "The question isn't if we can afford the car. It's whether the world can afford to keep doubting you." That evening, Julian received one more email. From someone anonymous. Short, simple. "I used to think this was just how it worked. You reminded me it didn't have to be." Julian smiled, then archived the message. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the silence was no longer his burden to break. He folded the signed documents, placed them in a drawer, turned off the light, and walked out, not as the voice of change, just as someone who refused to let quiet become complicity. The news didn't break. It spread, not like a headline, not like a scandal, like oxygen. Slow, quiet, in every room, every showroom, every office. People felt it before they could name it. A new culture. Not a nicer one. A real one. An intern in Dallas posted a note on the bulletin board. "The silence is gone. I can finally hear myself here." In Chicago, a longtime janitor found a handwritten thank you note in his locker. "You were always watching. Thank you for staying." In Atlanta, a black client sat down for a test drive and wasn't asked for extra paperwork. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to prove he belonged. On social media, something strange happened. People started posting pictures inside Carvani showrooms. Not of the cars, of the people. The captions didn't say "dream car." They said, "They saw me before I said a word." This time, the welcome was real. Luxury feels better when it doesn't come at the cost of dignity. Julian didn't repost any of it. He didn't even have an account. He just watched, quietly, steadily, as the culture began to shift without needing him in the spotlight. Because that was the point all along. In internal meetings, things changed, too. Board members used to speak over the only woman at the table. Now they paused, listened. Team leads who used to skim the DI slides started asking questions. One executive who had once defended Glenn requested to be transferred to a mentorship program. Not to lead it, to learn in it. Micah noticed the shift in smaller ways. At school, a teacher asked him to present on leadership, not because of what happened, but because of how he carried himself since. At home, he caught his little brother drawing pictures of cars with himself in the driver's seat. Not superheroes, not rappers, just him, at the wheel. In a quiet moment, Julian sat in the backyard with a notebook. He wasn't planning. He wasn't building. Just watching the sky change colors. Isaiah came out, sat beside him. "Dad?" "Yeah." "What's the difference between fixing something and changing it?" Julian paused, then said, "Fixing means going back to how it was. Changing means making sure it never goes back there again." Isaiah nodded, then pointed to the notebook. "Is that where you plan the next change?" Julian smiled. "No, that's where I write what's already shifted." Somewhere across the country, another family walked into a Carvani showroom. Same profile, same skin, but a different story. Because this time, the manager shook their hand before asking their budget. Because this time, the little girl didn't look down. Because this time, someone had already broken the silence for them. and the system had no choice but to listen. It didn't happen all at once. Justice isn't a flood. It's a drip, a wait, a whisper that becomes a sentence, a truth that won't be silenced anymore. And sometimes it sounds like footsteps returning to a place they never should have been pushed out of. The first reckoning came from within. Marianne, a former assistant at the Beverly Hills showroom, found herself lingering outside the building one morning. She no longer worked there. She transferred years ago, quietly, after witnessing the moment Micah and Isaiah were thrown out. She hadn't said anything then. She told herself it wasn't her job, but that silence had followed her. Into other jobs, into therapy, into dreams. So that day she walked in, not for a job, not for closure, just for a conversation. She found Julian near the espresso machine. Didn't ask for a meeting. Just said, "I watched it happen. I didn't stop it. And I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know I remember. And I'm sorry." Julian nodded. No speech. No reprimand. Just a nod. And that was enough. Because reckoning isn't always about being forgiven. Sometimes it's just about facing forward again. Then came James. He'd been a regional manager in training when the audit started. He'd laughed off the early complaints, called them optics noise. But when the new system came in, the one Julian designed, James didn't resist. He asked to be retrained, sat in sessions led by former whistleblowers, took notes, asked questions. One day, in front of his entire staff, he stood up and said, "For 2 years, I was paid to look away, and now I'm using that same salary to help us look harder." He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to be honest. Across the country in the Bronx, a young man stepped onto a TEDx stage. He told the story of the day he'd gone to test drive a Ferrari and had been asked to leave. The audience waited for the twist, waited for him to say he owned the company now, but he didn't. He just said, "I still don't own that car, but I walk into every space now like I own my right to be there." The crowd stood, not because he won something, but because he reminded them. Sometimes dignity is the only victory that matters. Even Glenn, months after his dismissal, wrote a letter. It was never published, but someone leaked it internally. It read, "I thought I was protecting standards, but all I did was protect my comfort. I was wrong. If you remember my name, I hope it's not as a warning, but as a pivot point." No one clapped, but no one denied the shift. At home, Isaiah asked Micah, "Why do people say sorry after it's too late?" Micah shrugged. Maybe they were too scared when it mattered. Isaiah nodded. "You weren't." Micah looked at him. "No, I was scared too. I just didn't move." Isaiah smiled and went back to drawing. A showroom, a family, a car with both doors open. Julian read another letter. This one came from a woman in corporate who had worked under Angelo for a decade. "You told the truth while I was still defending my place in the lie. I'm not proud of that, but I'm proud to be part of the shift now." She didn't ask to be acknowledged. She just wanted it in the record. Because that's what reckonings are. Not speeches, not press, just people turning around and saying, "I was part of the silence." But not anymore. The showroom didn't change overnight. No place ever does. But it held something different now. A presence. Not Julian's. Not Micah's. Something quieter. Something you couldn't name, but could feel every time someone paused before judging, looked again, or stayed silent instead of dismissing. That was the change. Not a plaque. Not a campaign. A pause. And the pause stayed. Julian returned one morning. Not to meet. Not to speak. Just to visit. He walked through the same glass doors, past the same display cars. The Bugatti was still there, except now it was flanked by 2 framed letters, one from a client, one from a child. Neither had names on them, just stories. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to feel every step, to remember, to mark it for himself. He nodded at the new staff. Some recognized him. Some didn't. Didn't matter. They nodded back anyway, not out of obligation, but because culture, once shifted, doesn't need reminders. It lives in instinct. He found the small side room where Micah and Isaiah had first been told to leave. It looked different now. Open bright. No stanchions. No gatekeeping. Just space. A little boy sat in the driver's seat of a Lamborghini nearby, eyes wide. His mother took a picture. No one rushed them. No one hovered. Julian smiled, then turned to leave. At the exit, he paused by a new sign on the wall. This space is for everyone. If that makes you uncomfortable, we invite you to explore why. He didn't write it, didn't suggest it, but someone had. And that was enough. That night, at home, he folded his old notebook shut. Micah looked up. Are you done? Julian shook his head. No, just quieter now. Micah nodded, then said, I think the world's quieter too. A better kind of quiet. Julian looked out the window. At the dark. At the stillness. Maybe it's not quiet. Maybe it just stopped shouting over the ones it used to ignore. Weeks later, Isaiah stood at show and tell holding a toy car. When the teacher asked why he brought it, he said, because we went somewhere once and they tried to tell us we didn't belong. But they were wrong. And now they know better. A father in Houston took his daughter to a Carvani showroom and was greeted by a black woman in a leadership badge. He asked how long she'd been there. She said since the audit. He said, thank you. She said, don't thank me. Thank the ones who didn't leave. In an employee lounge, someone folded a training binder and said, I used to think the rules were the problem. Now, I think the rules were just waiting for someone brave enough to write them differently. Julian walked past the original bench outside the Beverly Hills showroom one more time. The wind shifted, and he saw a small plaque someone had added to the bottom of the seat. It read, they tried to erase the presence. Instead, it became the proof that wouldn't go away. He sat down, not to rest, but to witness. One last time, and then he stood, not to return, not to continue, but to carry forward wherever forward happened to go next.